Sabbaths, with a bit of interruption, we've been going through the book of Daniel. And specifically, we've been looking at few of the visions that were given to Nebuchadnezzar and more so to Daniel. We talk about the fact that God is the one that is in charge. God is the one that removes the kings and he sets up the kings. We looked in Daniel chapter 2 verses 31 and 33. This is the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and he had a great image. He saw a great image in his dream. A few points of correction, and thank you for bringing that up to my attention. Last Sabbath, I mentioned that the chest was made of bronze, which it wasn't. The chest was made of silver, and the thighs were made of bronze. So he saw a statue which represented different kingdoms in different years and different powers that were ruling the well-known world at that stage. The second mistake that I made was that when Medo-Persia took over from Babylon, which symbolized in the chest, which was silver, they had 127 provinces, not 170 provinces. That was my mistake. So with that being said, these are the two things that I would like to correct. So last time, we talked about the goat that had one horn, notable horn, and that horn fell off without any intervention, and 4 horns came in its stead to 4 winds of the earth. And they represented the Macedonian or Grecian Empire that was ruled by Alexander the Great, and once after his death it was split into 4 parts. And specifically, we looked at Daniel chapter 8 and verse 9, where it says, "And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land." So this little horn was identified by the Bible and by the historians, specifically Adventists that looked at this, Stephen Haskell and Uriah Smith. Those are the 2 main sources that I've been using for this research. It was identified as Rome. First it was pagan Rome, and later on it was morphed into papal Rome, which we're going to see today as well. So Roman Empire in itself was one of the vastest empires that actually ruled the known world at that stage. So it expanded all the way from today known as Great Britain and all the way down to Egypt, Arabia, Judea, and Syria. There were limitations, but as in the dream, it was represented as the one that the legs were the legs of what? Iron, right? So, and it ruled very viciously. There was no mercy quarters. There was, when they conquered, they conquered. And we're going to see how all of that happened. But what's interesting is that Roman Empire did not come to be this vast in one overnight or very quickly. It started in 168 BC, and as it was expanding, the highest point of Roman Empire was under the Emperor Marcus Ulpius Trajanus. As you can see there, he's called sometimes Trajan. He ruled from 98 BC to 117, AD, 98 AD to 117 AD. And he was born in modern Italy, Spain, and under his emperorship, you could say, this when the Roman Empire was expanded the most. So just to give you a bit of a timeline as to how Roman Empire came into existence and why is it so important, why does the Bible identify it specifically in Daniel chapter 8, verses 11, 12, and then later on verses 23 and 24. So Rome defeats Macedonia at Pydna. We discussed this last time. Rome destroys Corinth and strengthened control over Greece. That was 146 BC. 63 BC, Pompey enters Jerusalem. Judea comes under Roman influence. In 49 through 45, Julius Caesar was a civil war. In 44, Julius Caesar was assassinated. In 31 BC, Octavian defeats Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. This is when Rome conquered, as it says here, toward the south, toward the east and toward the Pleasant Land. So toward the south, this is when Rome conquered Egypt. That was 31 BC. 27 BC, Octavian becomes Augustus. He was the first Roman emperor. And from AD 14 to 68, Julian, Claudian emperors, it was Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. So they all ruled within that period of time. And AD 70, this is where Tiberius, or under Tiberius, the Roman army came and destroyed Jerusalem. And he continues on. There were 5 good emperors in the period of Roman Empire from 96 AD to 180. It ended with Marcus Aurelius. And in 284, Diocletian became the emperor and reorganized the empire. So in 284, when Diocletian became a Roman emperor, the Roman Empire was too large for one man. So he divided into the Eastern Roman Empire and Western Roman Empire. But what happened later is that 20 years or so later, in 305, Diocletian, he abnegated his emperorship. He stepped down from the power, and Maximin, who was the Western power, who was the ruler in the Western side, he also abnegated, and Roman Empire was ruled, what he did before he stepped down, as you see here in 293, he established, but it wasn't enforced yet, he established a tetrarchy. So Rome was split into 4 portions and was ruled by 4 different emperors. And you can see this in this map here. So Diocletian, he was the Eastern Augustus. Maximian was Western Augustus. Gaius, Eastern. And Constantinus Chlorus was Western. So in the beginning, when Diocletian became the emperor, he simply divided in 2 parts, just to sort of keep the balance. But after his abnegation, or before his abnegation, right after his abnegation, it was divided into 4 parts. So again, Diocletian establishes the tetrarchy. In 306, Constantine is proclaimed the emperor by his troops. So this is where Constantine comes sort of into the picture, and we will see who is Constantine and what did he do for the church and for the Roman Empire in itself. Constantine, he was one of the sons, he was the son of Constantius Chlorus. So when his father died, Constantine was proclaimed an emperor by his troops, and that was in 306 AD already. So in 312, Constantine defeats Maxinius at the Milvian Bridge. So you can see here, this is where Constantine ruled sort of the Britannia, the France, Germany, and Hispania, and his rival, Maxentius, he ruled the Italy and part of North Africa. So because Roman Empire was divided into 4 parts, there were 4 different rulers. Constantine came ruler because he was proclaimed by his army. He became an emperor. So his rival at that stage, Maxentius, he ruled Rome and Italy from 306 to 312. He was the son of Maximian, a former Roman emperor, under Diocletian system. So all these, you could say, new emperors, they were children of the previous emperors, and they automatically assumed power after the death of their parents. So when Constantine was rising in the west, Maxentius also claimed the imperial power. So the Roman Empire had competing rulers on both sides. Constantine marched into Italy and defeated Maxentius at the Battle of Milvian Bridge on October 28th in 312. Maxentius, he was trying to escape the battle, and as he was retreating, he actually drowned in the river. Now, there was a third player on the stage as well. So Constantine, Maxentius. So Constantine conquered Maxentius, and then he started expanding his empire to Licinius, who was ruling the other portion of the Roman Empire as well. So he was the ruler from 308 to 324. He was appointed by Augustus himself, and Licinius gradually gained control of the eastern provinces, while Constantine controlled most of the western. So in AD 313, Licinius, he married Constania, Constantine's half-sister. And that same year, Constantine and Licinius agreed to the policy that's often referred to as Edict of Milan, and we will touch that. But just to give you a bit more about Licinius. He was appointed the Roman emperor. He marries Constania, cooperates with Constantine on religious toleration. In 316 to 317, first war with Constantine, even though they were working together, Constantine wanted to expand his territory, so he started attacking Licinius. So he attacks him. In 324, he defeats him. Licinian fleet defeated at the Hellespont, and in 324, September 18th, there was a final defeat. Licinius surrenders, and Licinius is executed a year later. So again, you can see from here that Constantine sort of absorbs all the other rulers. He either defeats them or he kills them. First of all, he creates an alliance with them, and then he breaks that alliance, he conquers them, and as a result, they're dead. So this is how Constantine was moving forward. And it's so, again, verse 10, and it waxed to the host of heaven, it cast down some of the hosts of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them. So Constantine started conquering, as was already mentioned, so he was getting greater and greater and greater. So the host of heaven represents God's church or his people. Rome cast down and stamped the host by oppressing and persecuting God's people. Pagan Rome first oppressed the Jewish nation and restricted its worship. Rome then reached the heights of rebellion by crucifying Christ, the Prince of Hosts, and later the same Roman power continued in its papal form, corrupting Christianity, persecuting the saints, and casting truth on the ground. So during the Roman Empire, pagan empire rather, and this is how it goes. In 30 to 33, that's when Christ and his ministry was going on. In 33 AD, he was crucified. 31 AD, he was crucified. Nero then started persecution in AD 64. Then Domitian, from AD 81 to 96, he was persecuting Christians. He was punishing them, but the scale wasn't very large. Trajan and Marcus Aurelius, there were various emperors. Christians could be executed if accused and refusing to sacrifice. Decian persecution, empire-wide pressure to sacrifice, death occurred, but probably not in enormous numbers. Valerian persecution targeted clergy and leading Christians. Diocletian, Gellius, Maximus Dea, the worst and most systematic persecution before Constantine. This is when Constantine sort of comes into power, and this is where him and Licinius, they make an edict of Milan in AD 313. What is this edict? The Edict of Milan was an agreement made in 313 by Roman Emperor Constantine Licinius. It gave legal freedom of worship to Christians and other religious groups through the Roman Empire. Before this, Christians had often been persecuted, especially under emperors like Diocletian. The Edict of Milan did not make Christianity the official religion of Rome, but it made Christianity legal and ordered that confiscated Christian property should be returned. So this was the sort of the end of the persecution temporarily, because Constantine became a Christian. And this where the stop for the persecution, this is where the persecution of Christians temporarily halted. All right? Now it goes on, verses 11 and 12. He magnified himself even to the Prince of Hosts, and by him the daily was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression. And it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. So, Rome became nominally Christian empire. The emperor professed Christ, and decrees were issued causing people to worship according to Rome's dictates. In that process, the emperor and empire exalted themselves above God. So this is when pagan Rome ceased to exist, and it started transitioning into the papal Rome. The decrees were issued causing men to worship according to the dictates of Rome. And this is that man, emperor, and the empire attempted to exalt themselves above God. Rather than going, even though he was a Christian, Constantine, rather than going to the Bible and doing what the Bible stipulated, he started putting himself on a higher pedestal than God by making decrees and changing doctrines. And one of those doctrines was in 330. It was not a doctrine yet, but he moved the capital from Rome to the other city, Byzantium, or also known as Constantinople, to call it the New Rome. The reason for that was that it was a much more strategic location than the old Rome. It sat between Europe and Asia. It controlled the sea route between Black Sea and the Mediterranean. It was closer to the wealthy eastern provinces. It was easier to be defended. And it was closer to more eastern military threats, and it allowed Constantine to build new imperial Christian capital without old pagan senatorial traditions of Rome that was happening there. So, 330, Constantine moves the imperial seat from Rome to Constantinople. In 508, the daily, or the pagan Rome, is taken away. 533, the Justinian decree recognizes the Roman bishop. And 538, papal supremacy begins after opposition is cleared. Now, there are a few days that are important. Before AD 330, and I will discuss this in a little bit, Constantine changed the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday, and I'll touch base on that in a little bit. But in 508 AD, the pagan Rome is taken away. We've discussed this in our previous study, and I will refresh your mind. So there were three powers that were refusing to bow under Roman rulership or Catholicism at that stage already. And there were the powers, the Ostrogoths, Visigoths, and Vandals, yes. They were under the Arian influence. You remember Arian, he was one of the converts to Catholicism, but he refused to recognize that Jesus and God, they were equal. And that theory spread across those three sort of, not territories, but through those three states, you could say. and they were not allowing Catholicism to grow and take over. So Catholics made alliance with Clovis. Clovis was from one of those territories. He was the king of Franks. He accepted the Catholic Christianity rather than Arian Christianity. Frankish military power used against the Arians. Clovis defeated the Arian Visigoths at Rule in AD 507, and Catholic bishop gained a powerful protector. The Franks became the strongest Catholic military power in the West, and the Arian resistance as a result is weakened. The Visigoths lost much to Gaul, and Catholic influence increased. So this is why 508 is important, because that sort of prepared a way for the Catholicism to spread far faster, you could say. Or it helped Catholicism to spread faster and to a greater territory, because the threat or the impediment was removed. And this is, we've discussed this, if you remember, in Daniel chapter 2, where the 3 horns were plucked off, right? So again, they were the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, and Vandals. They were the 3 that resisted Roman Empire, and as a result, they were completely eradicated, and Catholicism was able to spread. Now, going on, it says, and a host was given him against the daily, and by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and it practiced and prospered. So, a host was given him. Barbarian nations became supporters or instruments of Catholic Rome against the daily, against the paganism of pagan Rome. By reason of transgression, through the mystery of iniquity, apostasy, and false religion, they were able to grow and get traction. And as a result of this, the truth was cast down to the ground. Papal Rome obscured Bible truth with traditions and superstitions. Bible became obsolete in a sense, because the bishops, the clergy, they were not using the Bible as a guide anymore. There were a lot of traditions that were established to take away the mind of people from the Bible. And that's 1. 2, the Bible was completely locked up, so nobody was allowed to read and study the Bible. And as a result, it practiced and prospered. The papacy succeeded for a time to persecute the saints and grew powerful. So with that being said, so this is verses 11 and 12. But as I mentioned earlier, the Bible goes on and explains itself as well. So if we drop to Daniel chapter 8, verses 24 and 25, it gives us a bit more insight about this power. And his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also, he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy it. So let's take this section by section, and let's sort of dissect this. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Rome gained strength not simply by its own force, but through the help and cooperation of other powers. Rome often grew through alliance, diplomacy, political arrangements, and absorbed kingdoms. So remember, when Rome came to existence in 168 BC, did they just simply appear out of nowhere? No. They conquered Greece or Macedonia. They absorbed that, and that's how they were able to grow. Constantine absorbed Maximin, and then Licinius. So again, his power expanded because he was able to absorb and destroy and conquer what was already what already belonged to Rome. Now, he shall destroy wonderfully. Pagan Rome destroyed Jerusalem. Rome persecuted Christians. Papal Rome later persecuted dissenters and the Bible believers. Both pagan and papal Rome were destructive powers. Now, when it says he shall destroy wonderfully, it doesn't necessarily mean it's great and magnificent, but the speed and the ferocity that they were able to conquer, that was, you could say, wonderful. He shall destroy the mighty and holy people. Holy people are God's people. Pagan Rome persecuted early Christians, and Papal Rome later persecuted faithful believers during the Dark Ages. That was much later, from 538 and on. But we know that from the point when Jesus Christ was crucified, initially Jewish people were persecuting the Christians, but later on, under Nero and under others, as I showed the list, the persecution was very great. Now, I was trying to find out the numbers of of people that were killed, and it's quite difficult because there's not a whole lot of record. So the estimation, I thought it was much greater, but the estimate stands between 3,000 to 10,000 people were killed, which I think that's quite little, but again, this is what the numbers that I was able to find. So this is how Rome destroyed mighty and the holy people. Now, through his policies, he shall cause craft to prosper. Rome was politically cunning. Rome was not only powerful by armies, it was also powerful through policy, diplomacy, deception, and religious political strategy. Rome conquered by war, but also by craft. So there's a few things that I'd like to outline here. Alliances before conquest. Before Rome conquered a specific territory, it would often form a treaty with the neighboring kingdom and presenting itself as a friend or a protector. The second thing that they often would do is they would divide its enemies. Like in the case of the three horns that were plucked off, they were not able to defeat them. So they made an alliance with Clovis, who was a Frank, and through him, they were able to destroy the kingdoms or the provinces or the people that were opposing them. So Rome dealt separately with rival cities, tribes, and kings, offered favorable terms to some while isolating others, and that's exactly what happened. Also, what was a gradual absorption. A kingdom might first be called an ally, then become a client state, and eventually be converted into a Roman province. That's what happened to Judea. They made a peace treaty with them. The Judeans would be protected by Romans, but then eventually Rome absorbed Judea, and it became one of its own provinces. Now, Papal Rome, it lacked the permanent armies, but that possessed by secular kingdoms. So it often exercised power through religious and political influence. Alliance with secular rulers. So what they did is papacy gained protection by forming relationship with rulers such as Frankish kings. In return, the rulers could receive religious recognition, legitimacy, or support. Influencing king through religion. That was one of the biggest ones that Papal Rome was able to do. They would coordinate and recognize the royal claims, ecclesiastical judgments, and they would have threats of excommunication to influence rulers in political affairs. And you remember this happened in the time of Martin Luther, right? So when Martin Luther published 95 Theses, what did Rome want to do with him? They wanted him to stand the trial, be accused, and be executed. But as a result of that, they couldn't do that because he had powerful friends. And Frederick Wise of Saxony, he was one of the protectors of Martin Luther. So he protected him, he was able to hide him, he was able to make sure that he's not caught up, the Romans didn't catch up with him, otherwise he knew what would be the consequence of that. But as a result of this is the result how Rome was able to influence and sort of manipulate different kings and different powers into doing their own will, either by alliance or by threat. So, Moving on. By peace shall destroy many. Rome often came with peace treaties, friendship, leagues, protection, and political agreements, but those arrangements eventually brought nations under Roman control. So this fits Rome history. Nations entered alliance with Rome, asked Rome for protection, or became dependent on Rome, and later lost their independence. And point 6, he shall stand up against the prince of princes. Rome stood against Christ. Pagan Rome did this directly when Roman authority sentenced Jesus to death. Papal Rome opposed Christ by claiming authority over his church and his truth. So Papal Rome, or Pope, today is known as the Vicar of Christ, or in other words, representative of Christ on earth. And point number 7, one of the last points, he shall be broken without hand. This is still yet to come. This is a future prophecy. The final destruction of Rome power will be by God, not by ordinary human power. So through all of this, we can clearly see how Daniel, or rather what Daniel saw in his vision, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy wonderfully, shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Through his policy, also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand. He shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy. All of this was was revealed to Daniel in his vision, and most of these things came already to be fulfilled. So today we live in the closing scenes of the earth history, where there's going to be another jolt by by Papal Rome rather, where they will exercise their power. Not again, they don't have physically armies that they will be able to direct and threaten, but it will be through political alliance, through the influence of those that do have the power to coerce physically someone into obedience. But through all of this, we need to remember Daniel chapter 2, verse 44, that, and in these days of this king shall God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall be never destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break into pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. My dear friends, we live in the closing days of the earth history, where things are developing before our eyes. And if we're careful, if we watch the waymarks, if we watch what is going on around us, we can see that the time of fulfillment for this particular prophecy is not very far. How shall we stand when that great day comes? Are we going to be found worthy, or are we going to be found wanting? That's the question that we need to answer ourselves. Amen. Let us conclude our service with hymn number